Our next speaker's appearance here today has been kindly sponsored by TSB Bank. Thank you, TSB. He is the Director of Innovation at Consult Hyperion in the UK, and he's going to be discussing some of the trends carrying us towards what he calls Cardmageddon. I understand he's also an avid tweeter. He's already sent me a tweet. So if you'd like to converse with him on Twitter, at DGW Birch, and if you want to hashtag it, #NZ as well, that would be great. Please welcome David Birch.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the genuinely very flattering invitation to come down here and talk to you this morning. So when I was asked to come down, I was asked to come and talk about emerging payments, sort of what's next in payments. So my point, sorry, I'll just skip over you can read all that stuff. So my point today is to say that what's coming next isn't, Bitcoin or whatever, that sort of stuff, and, New Zealand's version of M-Pesa and all that sort of thing. But actually what's coming next is instant payments. And I'm going to try to persuade you that the implications of that shift are bigger than I think many of you are imagining at the moment. So that's where we're going to get to. So I'm going to do it through sort of two phases. I'm going to talk about regulatory context first of all, then a little bit about the technology, and then talk about what that means for retail payments. I hope that you'll be convinced. So I'll start by showing you, this is my sort of prosaic benchmark of where we are at the moment. So this is a picture I took on the train home from London to Woking. So 20 years ago, so this is a woman buying something on the train on the way home, right? So 20 years ago, I couldn't resist taking a picture of it. But obviously I didn't want her to think I was weird. So I had to pretend I was taking a picture of her legs, because that sort of thing happens on my train all the time. It didn't attract. It's a victimless crime. Come on, stop it. So 20 years ago, she would have been typing that card number into a nice big clear screen using a nice big comfortable keyboard. And in 20 years, all we've managed to do is get her to type the card number into a tiny screen using an inconvenient and uncomfortable keyboard. That's our financial, that's our first 20 years of progress right? We've gone from like the big screen to the little screen. Everything else about that process is rubbish, frankly. Honestly, 20 years and we haven't got further than typing in the card numbers again. So that can't be the picture of the next 20 years, right? Because the competition that's coming in this space isn't, dreary, legacy, slow-moving, dinosaur, other banks. I'm old enough to remember when payments were boring. Not everyone in this room can. And one of the reasons why it was boring is because the competition was other boring people like us, right? So you only had to be like marginally less boring than everybody else to make. But now the competition, as was pointed out this morning, the people that are going to destroy you in this space aren't other banks. It's Facebook and Amazon and Google and other people like that. And they don't work the same way that you do, and they don't have the same approach that you do. So the people that are going to fix that, if you don't fix that, they're fixing it, right? So my first point of context is that can't be the future. So what is it that's going to change? Now, there's a couple of different reasons for thinking that can't be the future, not just because, plastic cards are a sort of 1950s artifact of a sort of stupid hack to get around the fact that we didn't have a network that connected all of the consumers to all of the retailers and all of the merchants. We do have that network now, so we don't need those same kind of hacks to get forward. But there are other reasons for it as well. I was listening to Planet Money, which is one of my favourite podcasts, NPR Planet Money. And they had a woman who said she went to visit a friend of hers and she took her baby with her. And when she went, this is in the States, and when she got to her friend's house, she realised she'd forgotten to bring the diapers with her. She only had one. So her friend logged onto Amazon and ordered some diapers. And when they got up in the morning, there's a knock on the door and the diapers have arrived. So she said to her friend, how much do I owe you for it? Whatever it was, I don't know, $25 or something. So she logs into her home banking and sends her friend the $25 that she owed her. And it took 5 days to arrive. And so she said quite recently, how is it that Amazon can deliver nappies to any address in the continental United States in 5 hours, but it takes 5 days for the purely digital money to go across? And there is no answer to that. It's not like electrons run more slowly in bank networks than they do in free space. I mean, actually, they do slightly run more slowly. It's a distraction, but because obviously it's not free. So, but that's a reasonable question to ask. Like, how have we got to this? Like, it's 5 days to send the money. I mean, it's almost if I got Amazon to do it, like if I owed you $100, I'll log on and buy it and get Amazon to deliver the $100 in cash. And that would still be quicker than using the bank network to send it. So, I mean, she had a reasonable point, right? So it can't stay like that. So the question is, what is going to change it? Like, if I'm right, and it isn't your good nature that's going to cause the situation to change, but the pressure from competitors, who are those competitors? And if you look at a lot of the, like you see people talking about Bitcoin and stuff like that, I don't buy that as the sort of mass market solution here. This has got much more to do with the interconnection of payment accounts through actual real-time networks than using any of these proxies or substitutes. Bitcoin in particular gets way too much attention in this space because it actually is not a practical alternative to bank networks. In fact, I said the other day, I was giving a talk about this the other day, and I said in passing, some mildly critical thing about Bitcoin. And one of the guys in the audience said, well, you only say that because you're working for the man, you see, by which he meant Barclays. You're working for the man. And I said, if Bitcoin actually was cheaper and quicker than using one of the bank settlement networks, Barclays would use it. They're not sentimental people, Like if it was actually, but it's not. It's slower and it's more expensive. I was just looking at it right now. The mining take on Bitcoin this morning is about 1.6%. If you proposed an interbank network that was going to cost 1.6%, people would laugh at you. But somehow in Bitcoin, that's seen as being, it's hip and trendy and whatever. It's not going to be Bitcoin that gets rid of all of this stuff. It's going to be regulatory change. And that's because somebody said on the panel this morning, and it was an admirable sentiment, right, that the customer requirements are our number one, but they're not. Nobody who works for a bank believes that customer requirements are the number one. Because look at how the spending, I'm not picking on the banks, I'm just saying, like in general, like if you took a hypothetical general, let's say European bank, not one of the banks here, right? So let's take a hypothetical general European bank, let's say UBS as an example, right? So UBS's IT budget was about 2 billion euros last year, something like that. And you said, wow, that's a lot of money. You can really get a lot done for 2 billion euros. Well, you can't. Because 1.8 billion of the 2 billion euros goes on keeping the existing network up, stopping the ATMs from crashing, right? Patching the COBOL. You work in real banks, right? Like you walk into a real bank. When I first started work, I'm feeling very old because people in the audience are looking very young. And it's right, like the first project I ever did for a big bank in the UK, before I thought banks were these ruthless capitalist machines, and then you spend a week inside a bank and you're literally astonished that a statement ever gets printed. Like, how does this, you walk into a machine, wait, there's the data card 9000 for doing what's the PC next to it? Nobody knows. No one knows. But if you turn it off, the cards don't get persoed properly. No one knows what it does. But it's like, that's the real world. That's 1.8 billion of those 2 billion euros. And of the 10% of the spend that's left over for innovation, 90% of that goes on compliance. 90% of it. The amount of money that's actually left over for any kind of innovation is utterly negligible. The big banks in the UK last year spent, I didn't write these figures down, I'm doing it somewhere, but I think it was about 2 billion on KYC. It was about 5 billion on AML, CTF, PEP. I mean, these are enormous sums of money, with no cost-benefit analysis, I might add, but that's a different presentation. The amount of money that's available for innovation in this space is really limited. And frankly, whatever customers think, it's what the regulators think which drives the change in this space. So let's be realistic about what's happening there. So I thought what I would do is I would, just as an illustration, I would just have a little quick global look, and then I'll have a little European look, then I'll have a little UK look, because I want to show you how these different kinds of regulatory change and pressure interrelate to move us forward. So if we look at the example of sort of globally, right, I used MPP as the example here. So there's a global push from regulators, because, and actually I don't need to say this because everyone else has already said it this morning. I didn't realize everybody else was going to sort of advertise this fact for me, so I don't need to labour the point. But the regulators everywhere are looking at that nappy problem, the diaper problem. I don't know, is it diapers or nappies in New Zealand? I'm trying to be culturally sensitive, but but, you know, regulators everywhere are looking at that and saying, well, that's ridiculous. Money should move instantly from account to account. That shouldn't be some special thing. That should be just what you do if you're a bank, right? So in Europe, we have the Payments Accounts Directive, which has its own set of stupidities associated with it. But the sort of general point that you should be able to move money from any payment account, the reachability problem, that you can move money from any payment account to any other payment account is basically true. So everywhere around the world, the regulators are pushing for this anyway. So coming up with strategies that build on this is going with the grain of what the regulators want. And that's far more important than what the customers want. Except customers do want instant payment. Yeah, I hope you didn't mind me tweeting that phrase about New Zealand being more relaxed than China. I thought it was quite, because I'm pretty sure people here actually want instant payments as well. They're just not used to that sort of thing. So it sounds like a bit science fiction that you can send money from one. But once people find out you can actually send money from one bank account to another bank account instantly, then of course they'll want it, despite being more relaxed. So whether customers want it or not doesn't matter. It's what regulators want. Now, if you look down what's happening at other kinds of regulation, I've just picked one example here. So this is strong customer authentication. So this is regulation from the what was that thing we used to do? The European Union, I remember. So this is regulation that comes from, sorry, I know I shouldn't joke about it. But you've got the strong customer authentication regulations coming in, which mean, well, actually they're already in, which mean all of the banks have to provide actual, genuinely secure access to the accounts. Although apparently, if you read the papers this morning, apparently Tesco Bank didn't get the memo on this one, so I don't know quite what's going on there. But so, you know, if you have strong two-factor customer authentication, in other words, if you kind of start to solve the identity problem, then the payments problem kind of goes away. Like once this sort of stuff is in place, it becomes easier and easier for people to implement new payment systems. You know, once everybody knows who everybody else is when you come to the counterparties of a transaction, then I'm sorry to say it to this audience, but payments is just a bit of mucking about on a spreadsheet. You know, the hard bit isn't updating one account and debiting another account. The hard bit is knowing who the hell everybody is. So if the who the hell everybody is problem is being solved by somebody else, then the payments problem becomes commensurately easier and no longer becomes the preserve of banks. The reason for the account transfer stuff to be located with the credit institutions is a historical, you know, you might even say accident or anomaly. In fact, there's a very good Federal Reserve Bank paper about this, which says there's actually no economic reason why payment functions should be provided by banks on such a large scale. They don't really need to be. Anybody can hold payment accounts, it's easy. So we have strong customer authentication coming into place. And if you have strong authentication to the bank account, then you can instruct transfers from the bank account and you've reduced all the risks that go around it. So this, you have pressures like this coming in as well. So you've got the regulator saying, we want instant payments. You've got the building blocks that you need to make instant payments fly coming into existence for other reasons. And strong customer authentication is a good example. Then in the UK, and I'm not suggesting this is a model for the New Zealand regulator, I'm just saying this is an example. So in the UK, because the government decided that there isn't sufficient competition between the main banks in the UK, the government, through the offices of the Treasury, decided to have what's now called the Open Banking Working Group. They want this migration to open banking. So you've now got the Europe, for us, in the UK example, you've now got the European mandate for what we call XS2A, the access to APIs for the banks. You've got the UK Open Banking Working Group mandate, which says customers should be able to move their data from one bank to another bank whenever they feel like it at the drop of a hat. And because I'm a consultant, I have to think of these things in 2x2s. I hope you accept this as a de facto standard way of looking at everything. But I drew it up as a little 2x2 just to show you what the UK banks are dealing with at the moment in this space. You have, on the one hand, the mandatory APIs, so this comes from the European regulation and HM Treasury regulation. On the other hand, you've got the non-mandatory APIs, so the non-mandatory payment APIs are part of the European regulation, the EBA construct. The mandatory payment APIs, which will be the things that instruct the instant payments between bank accounts, I think it's going to be very difficult for banks to make any money out of those. Those are going to be mandatory regulated. At the moment, I don't know what my friends at VocalLink think about this, but I think it's highly unlikely there'll be much margin on those payments. So banks will have to provide those. The regulators are very unsympathetic to the banks wanting to charge for this kind of stuff. It's hard to see any margin there. The non-mandatory payment APIs, which the European Commission envisaged as being sort of the specialist payment functions, trade finance and foreign exchange and things like that, possible there might be some margin in those, but it's not transparently obvious to me, because those things are very sort of commodity provision. Unless a particular bank has some amazing special service that no other bank has, it's really hard to see any margin in that space. Similarly, when you talk about the mandatory non-payment APIs, so these are the APIs for things like give me my last transactions, so what the government is envisaging is that customers will log in, they'll download their last 100 transactions and then take those to another bank and say, could you give me a better deal, or to another credit card provider, or whatever, right? It's really hard to see how any money's going to be made on any of those either. So actually, in this last corner, the non-mandatory non-payment APIs is the area where most banks are trying to focus to try and find some special source. And my biases about this are very clear, because I think in this new environment, if you have to provide instant payments because it's mandatory, if you have to provide the strong authentication because it's mandatory, if there's no margin in it because it's all regulated, everyone's providing the same service, the place to look, in my opinion, is actually more to do with identity and verification than it is to do with money. So I feel that if you look at the sort of logical conclusion of this regulatory push at the moment, one way of looking at it is that it's actually pushing banks into a slightly different business. Because anybody can store money, anybody can move money around. But actually, not everybody knows who I am. And in fact, not everybody has a kind of legal duty. And since the banks have already got to do the KYC at vast expense, finding things for the banks to do with that KYC, finding some opportunities for them to make some money out of it, is very logical. So that's where I think so never mind what customers want, that's where I think we're being pushed at the moment, is into these quadrants, and in particular around the identity stuff. So what does that trend mean? That trend means that we're moving from a retail world of largely pull payments to a retail world of largely push payments. Because once those instant payment networks are in, once the strong authentication's in place, because everybody knows that push networks are cheaper than pull networks because you don't have authorization, all this sort of stuff. If there's no money, there's no payment, end of story. There'll be a lot of push in this direction. And I rather like the phrase that's used here. It's just a little thing I clipped from one of the newspapers. It says about some of the challenger banks in the UK choosing to weaponize their APIs. And what they mean by that is when you start to look at this environment, and obviously in the UK, the instant payments infrastructure has been around for a lot longer. When you look at this environment where you have third-party API access to that infrastructure through the banks, then the APIs become the place of competition for the banks. And banks historically aren't used to selling into that space. They're used to selling to the end customer. And now all of a sudden you're trying to sell your API to the developers and to a development community that has certain ways of working and certain, look how successful Stripe has been in that space, right? I mean, they didn't do anything that any other people, but what they did was they provided a better API, better development toolkit, better code. It's difficult for banks to compete in that space, but that's what they'll have to compete in. And that's why they use this phrase, weaponizing the APIs around the challenger banks. Because instead of providing a better service than the bank, you provide better APIs, and then people will build cool apps on top of them, and then customers will want to use them. So that's the sort of general banking as an enabler rather than banking as a service by itself. Let's say one more very quick thing about this. Actually, I'll say two very quick things about it. One is that if you look at the sort of business school case studies, there's a very big difference between choosing to be a platform to enable other people's services and being forced to be a pipe because you don't have any choice in the matter. So for banks to pursue an active strategy which says we will become a platform and we will provide those APIs to third parties to deliver, that's a potentially very successful strategy. Being a pipe is a successful strategy too, but being made to be a pipe, that's not such a successful strategy. So in other words, the do-nothing approach, the mandatory access to APIs just means that other people will come along and provide all the value-added services, and that's probably not where we would want to be in that space. Okay, now very, very quickly talk about technology before we get onto the more interesting stuff. So first of all, my assumption over any reasonable planning horizon that we're looking at, so let's say for strategic plans, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year horizon on the banking space. Mobile is everything. There's no point making plans for anything else because everybody knows it's a mobile-centric, smartphone-centric world. And my evidence for that is this picture from my chip shop, which I've been showing everybody for months because I think, well, because I'm English and my fish and chip shop is, you know, closely connected to my soul, frankly. And I'm very fortunate to live by this. Well, you're thinking that's just any fish and chip shop. It's not. That's an award-winning fish and chip shop in St. John's. So I live very close to an award-winning fish and chip shop, which is a very important thing to an Englishman. And I was really surprised when I went round, this a few months ago, I went round to the fish and chip shop and they'd sprung this thing in the window saying that they took Apple Pay. And I just thought that was really, like, there's nothing in the window that says we take Visa or MasterCard or Amex or anything like that. It says we take Apple Pay. Because to them, you know, because what are they trying to say with that sign? They're saying we are a happening chip shop. Like, we're a chip shop that's going somewhere. We're a chip shop that has a future, right? You know, that Apple Pay sign doesn't mean we take Visa and MasterCard and Amex contactless payments. It means something else, right? It's telling people that this is a chip shop that's connected, that's online and blah, 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 and all that other stuff. And as you see more and more places, as people begin to become used to the pays, I know it's a sensitive topic in Australia, but it's an inevitability, that becomes the sort of dominant brand. And the actual payment instrument that's used inside it becomes very secondary. And that goes back to the point I'm making about the push payments, because I guarantee to you, the day after the API, the mandatory API implementation goes in the UK, literally the day after, I'm expecting to get an email from Apple which says, oh, by the way, there's no need to bother those nice people at Visa and MasterCard anymore because they're very busy processing all these transactions. So why don't you just let us access your bank account directly instead? And by the way, if you do that, you'll get a free iTunes song every month or something. Because the merchants can easily incentivize customers to use direct-to-account rather than card alternatives. So my assumption is that in a relatively short time, those APIs will be used by the people that you're most upset about, Google and Apple and Facebook and so on. And if you think about it in the example of something like Facebook, I remember my son, I remember years ago, my son had a band like all kids do when they're teenagers, and they arranged a gig, you know, at a local church hall. And I remember after, it was, you know, they did a great job. I mean, they're kids, you know, they arranged it all themselves, they booked the hall, they did the tickets, they had the band, this blah, blah, blah. And for weeks afterwards, this was dragging on with, listen, can you PayPal Steve's dad with the £20 and he'll write a check for John for the 50. The payments were and I can remember then my son saying to me, why can't, because everything else had been done on Facebook. The whole thing had been organized on Facebook, you know. And I remember him saying then, why can't I just send the money on Facebook? Well, there's no obvious reason why not. And pretty soon that's exactly what you'll do. Because if Facebook has API access, why would you come out of Facebook? Like, Facebook is where you are. Why would you come out of Facebook and run some dumb bank application and log into it and all this sort of thing? You just won't do that. If I owe Vic $20, I'll just WhatsApp it to her. I won't bother coming out and running some bank thing. That's not going to happen. So that logo appearing on shops means a lot more than they take contactless payments. That's my first point. The second point is because biometrics have entered the space, and you have to see biometrics primarily as a convenience technology, not as a security technology. I noticed there were some more stories going around on Twitter this morning about something in one of the English papers today, sort of oh, if I steal your iPhone, I can take a copy of your fingerprint with some sticky tape, and then I can put it through this software, and then I can put it into a 3D printer, and then I can print a 3D model of your finger, and then I can use your phone to log in. And I'm like, yeah, but you had to steal my phone. By the way, this is the bit I noticed, right? I don't notice you making 3D copies of but I notice I haven't got a phone, right? This is the flaw in your fantastic plan for getting to my account, which is if you steal my card, right now, if you stole my cards right now, I wouldn't notice till Friday. The next time I'll use cards probably will be Friday when I check out of the hotel, or Saturday, or whatever it is. I probably wouldn't even notice till then. What do I use cards for? I use my phone for everything. But if you stole my phone, I'd notice in 7 seconds. It's like biometrics and the mobile phone and the tamper-resistant hardware form this sort of democratized, secure infrastructure platform that everybody can use. The banks don't have the commanding heights of security anymore. They don't have any redoubt. Anybody can use this stuff now, so anybody can get the same levels of security as the bank does. And so this leads me, I know I'm an arsehole for putting this picture up, but I can't resist it, because if I say it's all about identity, you don't pay any attention to me, but if Bill Gates says it, then at least you'll make a note of it possibly and tweet it or something like that, right? So this points in the same direction. You see what I mean? The technology push points in the same direction as the regulatory push. Because you've got the platform in place, because you've got the strong authentication using biometrics against the revocable tokens in tamper-resistant hardware, you're solving the problem of who is it. We've just finished a project for one of our financial services clients in the UK using some passive biometric stuff where there's software running in the phone which looks at what angle you hold the phone and what angle you touch it with your fingers and how quickly you type things and where you go. And they're trying to, it's not quite good enough for prime time yet, but it's almost there to get to the point when you want to do something. So I'll actually say to my phone, can you send Vic the $20? I won't even bother to type it into WhatsApp because I'm that lazy. I'll just say, can you send Vic the $20 I owe her? And it won't even bother to authenticate because it already knows it's me. The phone knows it's me already. It doesn't need me to put in a pin or a thumb or look at it or whatever. The phone knows it's me. So my point is the technology is taking us in the same direction as the regulatory stuff here, okay? We're moving to a framework where you know who everybody is. Payments is just a little bit of bookkeeping. So what does this mean? I think it means, I think Cardmageddon's a good name. So at the moment, I was looking at some projections this morning. At the moment, everybody sort of projects forward on the basis of what we have now. And of course we do that, right? So the dominant form of non-cash transactions are cards. And if you look at the growth projections for credit cards and debit cards, they're both very strong because people assume that the current trends will continue. And I think that's not true. And I can't prove it to you with a bar chart or a spreadsheet or anything like that. But my assumption is once the instant payments are in place, actually, a lot of payment environments are going to migrate there much quicker than you think at first. And I think if you look at the figures coming out of the Chinese market, you can see, right? This shift to instant payments is very, very rapid. Once people see they can just send money to anybody else. I went in to get my laptop repaired. I had to have the keyboard on my Mac replace today. So I look on Yelp and I find a guy that does Mac repairs and he's just down the road from my office. So I drop the Mac in, I go and pick it up in the evening and I say to the guy, oh, how can I pay you? And he said, oh, have you got Ping It or PayPal or just send me the money? Like that guy's never going to have how many transactions do you think he does every day? 10 or something? That guy's never going to have a POS terminal. He doesn't care about that invite. You can send money straight from one person to another person. So why wouldn't you just use that? What's all this other guff in the middle? And from the merchant perspective, all of the things that we value, the stuff that's been built up over the last 50 years, the payment guarantee and all this sort of stuff, they don't care. They just want the money to go from your bank account to their bank account, and everything else in the middle is an utter waste of time and money, a complete distraction. They don't care about acquirers and processors and switches, and they just want the money to go from your bank account to their bank account. And since I could do it standing there, I happened to use PayPal, and it was instant and quick, and everyone was happy. You see what I mean? Like, the idea that cards are going to continue to dominate, I think, is wrong. And we just imagine that going forward. So, the question is, in this market, how long is it until the day when non-cash retail point of sale payments with cards are less than 50% of the payments. And if I said that to you cold this morning, you'd probably say, oh my God, that's like 20 years away, right? But if you look at countries like Denmark, which I think is comparable to New Zealand in many ways, if you look at countries like Denmark, where 2/3 of the adult population are already using MPay, which is the instant account-to-account transfer service, you can see that actually that's tipping much more quickly than you'd think. So if I say, how long is it until most non-cash payments, retail point of sale in New Zealand are non-card, it isn't going to be 20 years. Well, unless you lot don't get your act together on the instant payments thing, which I assume you will. So it's going to move over much quicker than that. So analytical Cardmageddon is the day in which most non-cash payments are no longer card. And my point is, that's not a generation away. I think that's within the planning horizon for many people here. But I'm also very interested in narrative Cardmageddon. So narrative Cardmageddon analytical Cardmageddon is the day when non-cash payments are no longer dominated by cards. Narrative Cardmageddon is the day when a kid presses on the little card icon to pay for something, but has never actually seen a card. Because I was sort of thinking, like, you know how kids press that little floppy disk icon to save things? But they've never actually seen a floppy disk. They don't know what a floppy disk is. They just know that that icon means save things, right? Or like the little picture of the telephone when you want to call somebody, the little like on mine. I think it's very funny, but on my iPhone, the icon for calling is a little telephone handset, which kids have never seen. Well, the only place they ever see them is in old movies, And so I thought, just as an interesting thought experiment, how further away is narrative Cardmageddon? So when does the day come in New Zealand when a kid clicks on that card icon to pay for something but has never seen a card? Like, has that kid already been born yet? That's hard to say. Will that kid be born soon? I think that's quite likely, And I was thinking, just as a little tip for you, because I'm an extremely boring person, I spend a lot of my time reading old books about credit cards and watching old movies about credit cards. And my favourite old movie about credit cards is The Man from Diners Club with Danny Kaye from 1963. This is part funded by Alfred Bloomingdale, who owned Diners Club. So this was when nobody had seen cards. And so they made a movie about it with Danny Kaye. It's a terrible movie, by the way. But it's funny because, like in the movie, one of the characters will say to one of the other characters, and can you buy an airline ticket with a Diners card? And the guy will say, well, yes, of course you can. And then he rings up to buy an airline ticket. And then it shows you the call going through to the authorization center. And the plot is about Danny Kaye, and he works in the authorization center. And he gets mixed up with the computer, and hilarity ensues. But when's that day when you're going to have to show your kids a movie to show them what a card is? Like somebody messing around with this little piece of plastic at point of sale to pay for something, when they've got a smartphone, the person they're paying has got a smartphone, and everything they're doing is a sort of relic of a bygone age, right? It's almost as if we're using the canal network or something to pay for things, right? Because it's quaint and we like it, and the card is comforting to us, but it actually has no functional use in that loop anymore. I think, I'm not sure if I'm convincing you, but I think that day is not very far away. I think it's not off in the indefinite future anymore. So the implication of the shift to instant payments isn't just that people will be using some more instant payments. The implication of the shift to instant payments is that people will build on top of those instant payments to provide new ways of doing all of the things that we do now, except doing them quicker and cheaper. And because of what you saw at my chip shop, that's going to happen quicker than you think. If I went down to my chip shop and said, hey, I've thought of an amazing new way of paying for things, like Dave Pay. Dave Pay is this fantastic new payment system. It's better than Bitcoin. You go, oh, whatever, go, They're not going to change the point of sale terminals and all the signage and update the store controllers. It's never going to happen. But adding the N+1 payment mechanism to an app, that's easy, right? So when the merchant says, hey, why don't you use Shell SuperPay, right, which is actually just instant payments, tick here, everyone will do it. So it's going to accelerate. Now, The implications of that, I think, for my clients, so the people that I earlier mentioned in the context of being legacy incumbent dinosaurs who are trying to fight off this Ragnarok for as long as possible, my shorthand word for those is clients. And so I have a duty to... So look, the point is you can't stop this from happening, so what do you have to do? You have to put more value into the pool payments. We can't rely on, because the interchange fees are asymptotic to zero. We have to I don't want to talk about what those value-added services might be, but there's a big pressure to find more value-added services to put around the payments because we all know that we're not going to make a living out of those payments anymore. And I'm not telling them something they don't know. It's not like the people I work for are stupid. They're not. They're extremely clever. And they can read the papers just the same as I can. So there's a real pressure on these added value things. And if you look at, I don't want to pick one, but just, I'm nervous about saying it in front of Tim down here, but the take-up of things like Ping It in the UK has actually been quite low. I use it all the time because I have kids at college. But if you look at the overall usage figures, they're quite low, right? And it's instant and free. If you look at Venmo in the US, it's a hockey stick. It's absolutely going through the roof. It isn't instant and it isn't free, right? Because it's running through the debit network. And yet you look at those volumes. Why? Well, because it's a better app. It's integrated with social media. It's not the payment bit, right, that drives that usage. So when we come to implement the next generation of instant payments here, we'll be learning from Venmo, right? So yes, I know, it's the last slide. So I just want to show you, the innovation never ends at Consult Hyperion, right? I'm constantly trying to, so I'm going to try, so we were being told earlier on that it would be really good if you lot could tweet something, right? Like anything, I don't care what you tweet. You can be as rude about me as you like, as long as you get the Twitter handle correct, right? Because I'm an Oscar Wilde tweet. There's only one thing worse than being tweeted about, and that's not being tweeted about. So tweet what you like, as long as you get the handle right. But in the spirit of innovation, because I know some of you work for banks, and you may not be completely familiar with the concept of Twitter and social media, and interacting with people. So, so what I thought is just to make so what I've done, I made a few suggested tweets for you. So if you'd like to get involved in what the kids are doing, but you're unsure where to start, here's a few tweets that you could use, which would accurately reflect what's been going in the presentation. So this is the big headline, right? So everything I said at the beginning, in 2026, a bank will be a place where you store your identity, not your money. You can store your money anywhere. Cardmageddon, we're talking about that. The icon card will look like floppy disk, right? Tired and wired, that's a very popular meme, with the younger demographic. Okay, so, oops, and if you're going to finish somewhere, finish down the bottom, which is identity is the new money, which is why banks should be the providers of this, because in that new instant payments world, identity is where your margin is going to come from and not money. Thanks very much.